Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Reverend Jean Marie, and I serve as the Director for Racial Justice Ministries at Scarritt Bennett Center. We're always grateful for you to join us every Sunday as we continue on these conversations around what justice looks like in our world and what it means to be a co-conspirator. I'm excited about this conversation. This afternoon, we are on our part 2 on Let Us Live, the sheer audacity, our sheer audacity of integrity. And so we're part 2, and this week we dive deep into the work of justice, what justice looks like in the world where the Black trans community can live in equality and safety and love like everyone else. And what it means to be a co-conspirator, someone who actively participate in the work of not just dismantling white supremacy, but dismantling injustice in every which way, So again, we thank you for joining us. And as always, you're welcome to join in the conversation. Please add your comments and questions to the question section, the comment section on our posts. But like we say every week, difference of opinion is welcome in this space, yet difference does not mean hate or disrespect. And so any comments or questions that reflect hate or disrespect, we will delete immediately. For we at Scarritt Bennett Center's hospitality, radical hospitality is our way, and we believe in caring for those who are our guests, who are under our guests with honor. And so again, we're grateful that you've joining us this afternoon as we continue on this conversation. Let us live the sheer audacity of integrity. I want to introduce our moderator this afternoon, the Reverend Lewis Mitchell, who's back with us. All of our panelists, we're grateful to have back with us. Reverend Lewis, thank you for being with us, not just being with us and moderating this conversation, but thank you for also facilitating the invitation of mostly everyone on this panel today. So I want to thank you for your partnership in the work and creating this, making this possible for us. And I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you so much for the invitation to do this work. Thank you, Reverend Jean-Marie and Dakota and the Scarritt Bennett Center for having the courage and the integrity to have these series of conversations, the ones that we often have in the quiet, in the back, in the parking lot, in the alley, but not out front where everybody can participate and have a certain amount of safety and freedom to say, well, I just don't know about this. Or this is who I am. I've always been this. I've always been this person. These kinds of conversations will be the redeeming qualities in our communities as we move forward and try to find some kind of balance between freedom and agency. I am honored by each and every one of the panelists here, just extraordinary human beings with extraordinary stories. And we're going to begin by sharing a story of a trans person who has moved into the realm of ancestors. And I'm going to do this in wait a minute, am I right? Yes, I'm going to do this in alphabetical order. I'm going to go first, and then I'm going to call on Reverend Carmarian. I chose to lift up a singular person, Minister Bobby Jean Baker. Minister Bobby Jean Baker was born March 20th, 1964, and passed away January 1st, 2014. There's a lot that her bio will say about her, but I want to say some things that the bio will not say. Minister Bobby Jean had a full life. She went to prison, she got out of prison, and when she got out of prison, that was when all of the life experiences that led her to that place became fertile ground for new growth and new ministry. She took a long bus ride back to San Francisco, and she dug in doing work with the Tenderloin AIDS Resource Center, with the City of Refuge, United Church of Christ, beginning and being a part of Trans Saints, before Trans Saints was Trans Saints, the Transgender Gospel Choir, she did a lot of work with other people who were going through the similar circumstances that she went through. Uh, Jail, drugs, a life on the streets, out of necessity and out of choice. But she turned her entire life into a ministry and in being a face and feet and heart and hands on the ground. And one of her lines that we all hold on to is just do the work. You know, there are many of reasons why someone like Minister Bobby Jean Baker might have said, I'm not qualified for this. But what she said instead was yes. And her yes has changed many lives, including mine. And so I thank God for her life. She was killed in a car crash on her way home from a New Year's Eve watch night service at her church that she loved. I don't know that anyone would have seen that coming, and I know I was reeling when I got the news. But Bobby Jean lives on in all of us if we wish it to be so. You can see lots of things about her, and I encourage you to Google her and see many of the videos that she's in so you can experience the power and the presence of this mighty woman of God. I am going to pass it on to Carmarian now.
Thank you, Lewis. And I believe this is a sacred opportunity for us to speak those that went before us, that was actually modeling, living out their truth. And I chose who I call my community niece from Dallas, Texas. Her name was Malaysia Booker. She was 23 years old. She was found shot to death just a month after a brutal hate attack against her. I chose to bring her up because of several things. One is when I look at Malaysia at 23, I can go back in my own mind when I was her age and already at probably 8 years, close to 8 years already in transition. And I look at other countless, what I call my babies, because I'm an old woman. Look at my babies of trans experience and watch how they are still receiving the short end of the stick as I was being reared, not only in my transition, also by age. And so my reasoning for bringing her up was one, to honor her spirit. She did not get a chance to live a full life, but the life she did live touched a lot of people. And her life is still touching people. And thank God for her family, her mom, who's an advocate for our community, and for those institutionals who partner to make sure that we as trans individuals who become ancestors, that our life just don't get buried, but yet we center them so we can remember and they continue to live through the essence of our freedom of living here in the earth. But the other part is to our allies and our co-conspirators, and even within our own trans-identified community, that we are our siblings' keepers. It is our responsibility to also connect and to cover, to mentor, to love on, to be their parents in the absence, to be their confidants, to be their joy. And when I look at someone like Malaysia Booker and countless other young trans-identified, particularly Black women, in their death, I have to think, what more can I do as a biological parent, and also, as an elder by transition in this community? I want to be found where I am able to be an example and a refuge for our young trans-identified members of our community, so they can be protected and so they can live according to what their purpose is. And so I lift up Malaysia Booker, my community niece from Dallas, Texas. And she will never be forgotten as long as I continue to have breath in my body and to continue to preach justice and the gospel. And I will then pass it over to Eunice. I'm sorry, my bad. We'll send it over to Renee.
Hey, y'all. I decided to do Rita Hester. Rita Hester is the main reason that we have Trans Day of Remembrance. She was killed 22 years ago in Boston, Massachusetts. Rita Hester was born November the 30th, 1963. She grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, one of 5 children. There was never a time in her life when Hester wasn't Rita, according to her younger sister, Diana. As far as Donna can recall, her big sister didn't have a particular coming out story as a trans woman, but the family respected that transition. Her cousins, nieces, nephews all knew Rita, but a lot is not known about her life. So I can only go off of pieces of this article that I found about her, but she is one of the main reasons that we have T-Door, and a lot of people do not remember her, doesn't know her story. And I think that it's ironic as a Black trans woman that was murdered that we could say her name, but not be honored as far as being the reason for Trans Day of Remembrance. Her mother is 82 years old, and there is no progress in the case. So she will never know who killed Rita. So I'm lifting up Rita Hester, our reason for T-Door, Trans Day of Remembrance. And yeah, I'm lifting her up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you very much. Mo?
I chose to lift up the name of Selena Reyes Hernandez. She was a 37-year-old woman from Chicago, Illinois, actually where I grew up. On May 31st of this year, she became the 16th trans person to be killed in 2020 that we know. After telling a man that she was a woman of transgender experience, he left her home actually and returned 20 minutes later and shot her in the head and in the back, and then left and then returned again to shoot her several more times. And the only reason why I tell the details of that horrific killing was because in our community, I'm often met with questions of safety. I'm always wondering, when should I disclose? I'm often not knowing if a disclosure or a vulnerability of mine will lead to violence. And Selena was killed in the city where I was born and raised. I had my first job as a camp counselor in Marquette Park, the neighborhood where she lived. This took place in the height of the George Floyd protests in our country. So right in this moment where we're looking at social justice in this different way, there are still these kinds of injustices happening. So I say her name along with the names of many others today, and I'm praying that her light and the light of other ancestors be with us always.
Thank you, Mo. Reverend Shania?
Yeah, so very similar to what Mo lifted up, I want to lift up actually two individuals. The first person I want to lift up is Dominique Fells, who was murdered in June 9th, I believe, right in my own hometown of Philadelphia, PA. She actually was found by the Schuylkill River in Southwest Philly, where I spent a lot of my time as a child. And her body was dismembered, her legs were cut off, and she was left for dead when the police found her. And just like so many others, she was misgendered in the news, and misgendered as well was Tony McDade. And I want to bring his name up because we can't talk about racial injustice and what's going on and the social uprising going on in our country when in the wake of what is happening and lifting up the names of so many others, his name has not been lifted up enough, in my opinion. And the fact that when he gets shot, the cops are chasing him down the street when on a supposed identity of a crime, and they shall, excuse my language, stop nigger, and shoot him from the back. And he also is misgendered in the news. And there also is no progress in either case. And so we say both their names as they both died this year.
Reverend Eunice, please.
So first I want to just in this moment, just ask for a covering for us. A covering for us. This is difficult for us to have to do. because it's very triggering, and it just breaks our hearts. So I'm asking for a covering for us, for those who are listening. Just cover us in your spirit, because this is hard, that we need to speak of our community members this way. So there has been thus far this year approximately 28 recorded trans deaths at the hands of others. And it probably is more, of course, we know. These numbers are predominantly trans women of color. That number has already surpassed the number from last year. There are no solid statistics regarding men of trans experience or that take into account other forms of transphobia that were contributing factors to their deaths. The 28, we know their names, we speak their names, we recognize that they existed, and today we have spoken in some brief way to who they were. But there are countless others who we may never know their names and what happened to them. Those who may have been taken from us by murder, suicide, health disparities, and the like. We may never know their struggles or their happinesses. They too are our honored departed. Trans martyrs whose names we do not know, who have left us with possibly no intercessors. They may have been forgotten by their friends, families, associates, but we remember them now. We remember them today. And in doing so, may they rest in peace with their Creator.
I'd like to invite all of you here on this panel with me and those listening in to just take a brief moment with me of lifting up the named and the nameless, those who have gone on, and welcoming them to the bosom of their Creator. Please join me in a moment or two of silence. And thank you so much, Rev, for offering that covering. This was harder than I expected it to be in some ways, and yeah, it never gets any easier. And unfortunately, it also never seems to get lessened. But that is my prayer, that every day that goes by, we learn how to love one another, especially in the Black community. And I want to move into our first question for discussion. And yeah, okay, I'm just going to say the question. What are the unique injustices in the trans community that are not often included in the Black Lives Matters movement? And I want to add to that, lift up your experiences, certainly, of the Black Lives Matters movements, and recognize that it is not just this movement in which our concerns are not included. I will open the floor if you would give me a howdy or a hand sign. And Reverend Shania?
Okay, sorry, I can't get off on mute. My bad. So this question is a good way to start, because I think one of the issues is that what's not being lifted up in the BLM movement or that's going on now, or in subsequent other civil rights movements that have happened, is the problem that happens in what we call in the house, where part of the discrimination and bigotry that folks who are trans experienced or people who are non-binary or gender non-conforming part of what they get comes from other Black folks. I would say a great deal of what happens comes from other Black folks. And I would even go further to say a great deal of that comes from folks who consider themselves to be a part of the faith community and are operating on a theological approach that is very much non-inclusive and very much hurtful and harmful to people who live in trans experience and non-gender, gender non-conforming or gender non-binary life. And so I think that what we aren't talking about is how we hurt ourselves and how we cause more problems for ourselves than need be. And if we ever stood in unity in the way that Black Lives Matter was rooted in, then we would have a different experience in this current social uprising.
Other thoughts?
And I guess I'll piggyback more, but I think for a woman of trans experience as myself, as a Black woman, I don't just look at the Black Lives Movement from an institutional, but also a collective. All of our efforts, as we're currently seeing in the state of our nation, where there's just so many of us in different pockets. And it makes it very difficult sometimes to even understand the consistency of inclusion. And that's what I want to be able to target is that I think when I am in a Southern state as Alabama and doing the work from a social justice lens, oftentimes I see that the language or how the work is being presented is not always supports the narrative of the intersectionality behind my race. I think a lot of times what happens is I show up and I can be accepted as it relates to the color of my skin to be part of the movement. But then once my intersectionality start unpacking itself, such as my, trans visibility, yet along even my theological approach. And at times they get then compartmentalized where I fit in this movement. And it no longer becomes a part of me joining the movement because of my race. I now have to center to ensure that no one is left behind, because my race cannot be ignored, just as well as my trans visibility can't be ignored. So it's bringing all of that under the roof of being inclusive. And I think a lot of times this is how we're marketing to come together as one, that it is beyond just we're all welcome, because that still has to be defined. But if we can all come together and understand that the Black Lives Movement is a courageous movement, it's a brave space to come under one fold in all of our many diverse intersectionalities to move the needle forward in what our consistent message is. And that would be that the color of our skin does not minimize the power that we have within us. And that power really comes from the diversity of our intersectionalities joining together. We are the movement. We are the utopia, or we are that tree of life in the Garden of Eden, to be honest with you. But we have to own that within our Black communities, understand that we are not in position to segregate. There is no injustice when we segregate, but to look upon me as a Black woman of trans experience and center my Blackness, because before anybody catch this tea and clock me, they're going to see the color of my skin, and there's going to be a perception of prejudice based off that. And then things add more icing on the cake when other things that are still being accepted in this current society. I think as Black people, we are the example to accept. We are the example to be courageous. We are the example to nurture, and we are the example to be able to come together as one. We have a blueprint. And that blueprint comes from our ancestors like Dr. Martin Luther King and all the wonderful people who laid the roadmap for us. But at the same time, we also have a roadmap because we're living this every day. And a lot of times we can be empowered by what was left for us as a roadmap, but our actions is what is going to be needed in order to justify, to see if we need to tweak something. You understand what I'm saying? Tweak, mean accept me because I am a trans woman of experience, because you're accepting me because you're not going to erase me out of my Blackness. You're not going to erase me out of my Black culture. We get that enough from our Black communities, even in family. Once I say that I'm a woman of trans experience, I'm no longer seen as Black. I'm seen as the other. And when we start recognizing that the other also has power, and that is the missing link for us to come together, to have more ammunition to move the work and our message forward, then we'll realize how important it is for us as trans-identified to be on the front line. Because we know what it feels like on a day-to-day basis, not just because unfortunately, because someone died in the Black community, we die every day. And we resurrect to tell you our stories and to tell you what should be done. And we have to be able to get that same invitation inclusively for us to be on the front line in order to see the movement move forward.
I want to remind those of us listening in that you can type your questions into the chat. We are certainly here for them, and we'll have a bit of time at the end of this to answer the questions. I also want to remind people that the Black Lives Matters movement is not a monolith. It is regional, and each regional or local chapter has its own personality and its own inclusion. And I know that Renee began a chapter in their area, and I would love for them to say a word about how that experience has been.
Actually, we don't, like, Black Lives Matter doesn't have leaders because we're a leaderless movement. Anyone can participate. It just happened that I was part of a core group in Memphis that started a chapter based on the 13 principles guiding our work. It was easy to be in the movement, but as Kamarian says, I've even been told at trainings from civil rights leaders to, like, just be Black and don't complicate the Blackness. Just be Black and we'll catch up if you just be Black. And I'm like, excuse what I'm about to say. I'm a whole ass person, and you gonna tell me that I got to divide myself like a pie and just be Black and be with my brothers and sisters and siblings? I said, no, this is not going to stop me, because I continue to enter these spaces where people don't understand. And one of our thing was, for me, most of the people in my chapter, they used to not let me be the one that has to correct people. They were like, you don't need to hold that piece. We got you. So if anybody misgendered me, one of the people would pull that person completely away from the group and be like, this is Renee's pronouns. If you don't like that, you can leave. So I never had to hold that piece. But also, people need to remember that Black Lives Matter was a hashtag first. There was no formula to how Black Lives Matter. And I don't want to get into, like, the oppression Olympics by saying that trans people aren't normally supported until we become a hashtag on Twitter or somewhere, say her name or something like that. And I feel like we need support before we become a hashtag. And also that people need to pick up the philosophy and say, if they kill them, they're killing us too. And embrace that and say that they're part of the community and we can't be leaving anybody behind. I understand the intersectionality of identities, but I feel like as Black people, we hold multiple identities, and it's okay. It's okay. We shouldn't have to compartmentalize those identities to be in community with people that look just like us. That's one of the banes of my existence, is going to a space and someone entering the room and saying, "How y'all doing, brothers and sisters?" And I'm like, don't you know that it's people that I exist outside of that binary? And you're walking into a room when you could easily just be gender neutral and say, "Hey y'all, hey family, hey sibling, hey beloved," any of those things. And I say it to them very easily, and no cis person was hurt or harmed with that expression. Okay? So it's more than just bathrooms, but I feel like sometimes the names of Black men are more uplifted than the names of Black women. And I'm going to use Malcolm X's expression that one of the most disrespected Black person is a Black woman. And I'm gonna add trans woman to that as a matter of fact, because when people don't realize you're trans, once they realize you're trans, the whole energy changes. There's a lack of respect that comes from disclosing. And I feel like disclosing is individual to the situation. If we are going to sleep together, you don't need to know. In general conversation. But for me, Black Lives Matter has been a way to activate my activism, which I already was an activist before Black Lives Matter, but I was more so in getting people to understand that, just like you said, Blackness is not a monolith, and we can't keep leaving people alone because you're uncomfortable by people's coming, like me. When I enter a space and I tell people I don't believe in male and female and I'm a blending of the two, they want to be like, "Oh, that's too complicated. You taking me too fast. I'm not ready. I'm learning, you know." And I feel like if you've been in space with me more than one time, I shouldn't have to be repetitive with you about my pronouns.
I want to thank you for that. I think there's so much that we need to cover. And what I want to do is I want to fold in the second question and see if more, because I think they're connected. I'll put it to you that way. So I'm going to fold in the second question for everybody. The second question is, what does healing and justice look like in the trans community? And I'm going to alter that to say also for the trans community. And who are the co-conspirators and what do they model? And I'm going to begin by saying something really indelicate. We have all of these murders of Black trans women. And as we know, most partner violence is intra-racial. So these aren't some outsiders killing our sisters. This is my uncle and my daddy and your nephew and your brother. These are Black men, more often than not, horrifically murdering Black trans women. And so when we talk about what it means to be a co-conspirator, I'm not going to make it light and fluffy, because light and fluffy is over. It's time for some heavy lifting about how we talk about how we lift up all women, trans women, cis women, all. How do we, and I'm challenging men right now. I'm not talking to people who aren't men. I'm challenging men. How do we, particularly men of faith, lift up all women, protect all women, minister to all women, feed and heal all women? If we're not doing that, we need to have some conversations and get to work. Other folks, what are you seeing in terms of healing and justice and your words for co-conspirators? I'm going to start with you, Mo, because you haven't said anything in a minute.
Yeah, I was thinking that the questions are connected, as you said. What came to mind as you were talking, and as I was listening to Renee, is this idea that our identities as trans people, as Black people, are integrated identities, or that's what I'm hoping for. I'm striving for in my work as a therapist always. The healing work looks like integrating the identities. And so being in a part of any kind of movement that's asking me to show up segmented or separate from these parts of myself that are important, or to pick and choose when I show up, that's anti-Black. That's what whiteness asked me to do, and I refuse to do it. So I was sitting here getting revved up. So thanks, Renee, for that. I was really feeling so much of the emotion behind having to show up not whole in spaces. So healing for me would look like getting to be myself and bring all of who I am, and to be seen as a gift to the movement. I have more to say about it, but I also want to keep allow the conversation to keep evolving here. But to the first question, I really was feeling that healing would look integrated, and so much of what's left out is our individual experience as trans people, the things that do impact us. A lot of what I've been hearing a lot lately, for example, has been about voting. And then I started thinking, well, I recently moved, so it's too late for me to change my ID, and I don't want to show up to the polling place and have somebody give me a hard time about what I look like and this and this and that. So I guess I'm gonna be mailing in my ballot, but now they've removed the mailboxes. So what am I gonna do, right? That's an added layer as a trans person that a lot of people don't have to think about. And so we're not just talking about getting voting rights. We're talking about like documents and passports and like all this other stuff. And that's when I guess I have my wheels turning about all of those things. And so that's what I feel like is often just not a part of the conversation that really should be a part of the conversation. So I love to talk about intersectionality, and I'm really with you all on that.
Reverend Yunus?
Yes, thank you. Everybody said just about everything that I was going to say, which always happens, which is fine. So there's a lot here. There's a lot here to unpack. One of the things that I'm hearing insofar as the healing process is that we have to recognize that some of these things are within ourselves that we have to deal with, that we have to tackle them for ourselves first. I can't recognize it in someone else if I haven't recognized it in myself first. That coming from generally a heteronormative kind of background to begin with, that once I transitioned, that I had to get rid of a lot of stuff that I brought with me. From mama and them, from the way from school that I went to, from the friends I used to hang out with, and all of that. I had to get rid of a lot of, and still am working out some things, because every now and then I'll come up with or say something and it's like, ooh, that really wasn't right what I just said. And that really wasn't right what I'm feeling about it. And it's really not right what I'm thinking about it. So there are processes in place that we have to understand and recognize for ourselves first. And once we do that, it's do unto others as I would have them do unto me. Well, there's some things that I might do unto someone that I didn't think about that would not be right, or that would be off, or that would be othering in some way or another. So a lot of it begins within me first. I have to recognize those things and fix them and tweak them and do what is necessary in order to recognize them in other people, and then to help make those corrections within them. As far as the healing part. But again, everybody actually said all the stuff that I was over here writing it down, and I was like, okay, let me take that off because Carmarion said that and everything. But we know what the things are that has to be done. We already know. The map has been laid. The roadmap is there, but we have to also see that some of those roads have changed and shifted and moved. And because of that, we might have to make some adjustments, but do it doing the work, like Bobby Jean said, do the work.
I want to say first two things. One, if you're tuning in with us, you still have time to write down your questions to the panelists. We still have another 15 or 20 minutes. I just want to give us a time check. And I'm going to go next to you, Reverend Shania. But I want to say it's important also before we do the work externally, and that we do some work internally, and that we understand what is and is not our calling. Now, I know I'm being a little messy here, but you got to know where your gifts are and where your gifts are not. And just because there's an opening don't mean that's your opening. You ain't got to take every opening that comes along, because in reality, if being Black sets you back, and being Black and in the LGBT sets you back, and being Black and the T in the LGBT sets you back, then we've already got a few steps against us. We need to both know and know where we can find support in community. Again, you ain't got to be perfect, but you need to know where you can find support in community to do this heavy lifting. It looks light and fluffy on stage and on the panel, but when the sun goes down, this is heavy lifting. It's emotional heavy lifting. It's spiritual heavy lifting. It's physical heavy lifting, and it's emotional heavy lifting. And I'm going to encourage, this is not even for you people listening in, really. This is for us in the panel, in a community. Find yourself one or two people that you can really, really trust to support you. That means to tell you, no, that wasn't quite it. Step away from that one. That's not a good one. Or to say, you know what, you can do this. I know you've never done it before, but I've watched you. You've got every gift you need, and I've got your back. We cannot do this alone. We also cannot continue to wait for someone to support us before we go ahead and put an oar in the water. Final note from me, pet peeve of mine, if you're out there in the world, I really hate when we lift up movement leaders like Dr. King and other people, and we don't talk about Bayard Rustin. And we want to lift up, we want to talk about all these great authors and amazing people. They were part of the LGBT community. Y'all didn't like them when they were living. You trashed them when they were living. But now that they're dead, you can make them iconic and use their words. I want those of you who are in the cishet community, don't wait till we're dead to use our words. Honor us now. Honor our contributions now. We are not following along on your bandwagon. We've been out in front leading since the beginning. So know your history. Reverend Shania.
I wasn't going to say that, but to your point, Langston Hughes, Zora Hurston, A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, Josephine Baker, so forth and so forth and so on. But yes, we do have folks who have gone on to be ancestors who are definitely a part of our community. But for me, when you talk about healing and you talk about finding your lane, I feel like part of my calling as a 21st century abolitionist is to deconstruct theological bullshit that has kept us bound. I'm cussing because it's Sunday afternoon and church is over. That has kept us bound and kept us in boxes and kept us segregated in ways that has caused us more harm and detriment than God ever intended. And because there's a difference between religion and there's a difference between what is really going on. And so dogma exists in a way that has kept us women's second-class citizens, has kept queer people not only just not in leadership, not acknowledged, not affirmed, and not at any place at the table. And so when you talk about what the root is and how healing starts, you have to talk about theology that is perpetuated generation after generation, that is part of the reason that the Klan stands on, and all these other hate groups stand on some form of misguided theological fake ass Christianity. Oh, I'm cussing a lot. Pray for me. But that's part of the problem. And so we're going to stop it at the branch. We got to cut it at the root. And I feel like that's my calling. That's why part of the reason why I work in denominational settings, and part of the reason why I do the faith work in public and pulpit ministry, because that's what God is calling us to. If we're going to be a people of liberation, let's liberate right here on the pew before we go anywhere else, because that's the problem.
I love being on a panel full of preachers. Renee?
On the healing piece, I was thinking about restorative and transformative justice. And sometimes in the restorative, we have to take that person that has done harm and rehabilitate them to be able to be within community with them. It's not easy. And we have to figure out, how do we do that with people that have done harm? Because as a trans community, we know who within our community are also abusers and users that are also trans. And we continue to not even address that within movement. So we have to start doing restorative justice and transformative justice to rehabilitate these people that have committed harm, and also bring them back where they can be around the people they may have harmed without continuing to harm that person. And just like Lewis said, that's the heavy lifting of healing. You have to, if there's no catharsis, there's no release in healing, you're not healed. And that's plain and simple. If there is not a release of comfort that you receive from the healing process, that's not, you still broken. So I just wanted to mention that whole transformative and restorative justice, and also just remembering people that we are in community with. And I don't even like to use the word allies. I like to use co-conspirators and accomplices, because in any direct action, the trans community, it's 1 million of us in the United States, but it's 365 million people in the country. And we cannot do this without the cisgender people gaining the understanding and becoming woke about trans people, because we're not going nowhere. And we always been here. But how do we activate those people so that, just like what they say happened in Los Angeles, that should have never happened. You know, that people will stand around and watch somebody harm somebody instead of stepping in and saying, hey, that's not right. They're allowed to be themselves freely. And we have to have people that ask themselves, would they stand up for trans folks instead of being an ally and being a real accomplice? Right. Are you ready to put your body into this movement and say what is right and what is wrong when you see a trans person being attacked or any of that? That's what real co-conspirators and accomplices do. They don't stand in the back, I'm an ally, yet not vetted. Not vetted, you're just saying you're an ally, but you don't have any practice. Mm-hmm. And to be an ally or accomplice, you need to put it into practice.
I want to use this last few minutes answering the question, who are the co-conspirators and what do they model? Now, I want to take this opportunity for us to lift up some existing co-conspirators so that those who are aspiring co-conspirators might have someone they can look to as an example. If there are folks that you want to lift up and shout out for the work they've done, and recognize that all of the work that is done to support us isn't done with a megaphone or a microphone. Most of it happens on the ground and behind the scenes. And I would encourage you, if you see someone answer your question in a moment, Reverend Shania, I think that there's a way in which we have work to do and our co-conspirators have work to do. Let's try to give folks some direction to at least begin to know where to start, if we can. The floor is open.
It sounded like Renee was beginning to answer that question when they were describing what it does at least look like to be a co-conspirator. And I think in my experience, it is certainly not those who offer lip service, but it's definitely those who, I want to use like a metaphor, like they don't, not necessarily self-sacrificing, but maybe like will jump in front of the harm so that you don't have to be harmed. I'll say it like that, like someone who will tackle the hurt so that you as a trans person don't have to deal with that particular hurt. I can't say that I have like an example right now in my mind. I'm hoping that one comes forward, but I guess I was like really hearing Renee as they were really going forward with that.
So I actually am feeling the same way Mo is. There isn't any, one person necessarily. I know, for instance, that there's Bishop Yvette Flunder, who does a lot of work in our community. My own pastor does a lot of work in the community. Bishop-elect, excuse me, Reverend Dr. Vanessa Brown. But, I'm also thinking even just on a one-on-one kind of basis, how someone, for instance, someone in the trans community who needs someone to just walk with them to the subway, or go with them to the hospital, because just getting medical done, okay, especially when you're early in your transition, just getting someone to just to just help you navigate through some of the simplest things in life. During the pandemic, I had a couple of my trans sisters here in New York who were having major dysphoric problems with leaving the house just to go to the store at the corner, because they just didn't know how they were going to get themselves together. Because it's strange, because well, not strange, when the city here in New York, when you're walking down the street, there are tons of people, thousands and thousands of people, where you can kind of hide and blend in. That's what you do before you walk out of the house. You hide and blend. You get yourself together. You hide and blend in. But now you're walking through a city that is desolate. There's nobody there to help cover you. So just the simplest things in life. Walk with, if a trans person, if you're noticing that they're having a difficult time and just going from point A to point B, would you walk with them? Would you be willing to do that? That's, to me, as an accomplice. An ally would be the one on the phone telling you how you should do it. I don't need you to tell me how to do it, but will you go with me? Will you walk with me? Will you go with me to the supermarket? Are you going to feel comfortable with yourself going with me? That, to me, is an accomplice.
That really had me thinking, like, I was hearing, like, what would Jesus do in the back of my head? Like, Jesus being like this great example. When you said, Eunice, will you walk with me? That felt very much like, if that's the model, will I go with you? I mean, beautiful, just beautiful.
Will one of you talk about what dysphoric means, in case people don't know what that means, Mo? Since
Yeah.
you got your, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Dysphoria, or something being dysphoric, is the experience of, in my opinion, misalignment. And it's sometimes a misalignment between the expectation of society against how you actually really feel. Not anything really arising inside of me that's dysphoric, just my experience of what society expects from me and how I really am. That's how I would describe dysphoria. Does anybody else feel like that? Want to add something to it?
I agree with you. I mean, it's just the disconnection of your body. You're not seeing your body the way you want it. Just like yesterday, I wrote a post that I needed some laser hair removal because it wasn't in the budget, and I was feeling dysphoric because I like to have a smooth face. So that's one example.
Mm-hmm.
Dysphoric can also cause you to want to do body modification to make your body look the way you feel.
And also to make your body look the way you think will make you safe in a world that will target you visually. That's like another 3-part session. Carmarian, we haven't heard from you in a moment. Would you like to share a word on any of the questions about both healing and justice and also co-conspirators, and what do they model?
You know, I'm sitting here listening. I had to pull out the Bible. You know, it's Sunday. And thank you, Reverend Shanae. Sunday evening in your world, but I'll be getting dressed now for a 3:00 service in the Pentecostal church and then back at 6:30. You know, I'm listening to this, and ironically, I created a sermon from more from a trans theological point of view, and I want to share that to kind of sum up my thoughts as it relates to allies, as it relates to co-conspirators, and so forth. And I love the examples that Eunice and Mo both brought in context. At the same time, for me, when I am out there as an advocate and as a co-conspirators, because we're co-conspirators also within the trans community, some of us that are on the front line, some of us that are gatekeepers, some of us that are leaders within this this trans visibility movement. But Ezekiel, familiar for those that subscribe from Christian texts. I love the book of Ezekiel because it talks about an old familiar passage about the valley of the dry bones. And I don't really concentrate as it relates to the who, but the why. And Ezekiel is the co-conspirator of the nature that I look for, that can be, one, obedient, two, go into unfamiliar territory, but feel inclined that this was my call. This is what I've been called to do. And I focus on us as the trans community as being part of that valley experience. And no co-conspirators, not even an ally, comes to that grave or comes to our community. They expect for us to show up to them, but how often do they come to us? And so a co-conspirator like Ezekiel comes to the place, is ushered to the place, is ordained to the place, and to speak to the graves and say that you shall live. And those are the type of things of affirmation is that I'm looking for a co-conspirator, not an ally, because as Una said, an ally would tell me how to do it. I know how to do it. I died doing it. Come on, somebody. You know, I'm dying daily. I'm being crucified daily. I'm persecuted daily. When I walk out my house, we're talking about dysphoria. Can we talk about when I walk out my house, automatically I'm a target? And I don't know where it's coming from. So when I get people like Ezekiel and other co-conspirators that will be able to come to the grave and say, you shall live. And not only that, if you can't breathe, I'm going to breathe breath into you so you can, because we're going to walk this out together. And not only that, when you have enough strength, and first of all, let me back up. Even when we as a trans community, because we have been tokenized and abused for so long, we have a trust issue when it comes down to who is on our side, or do we fight this battle ourselves? But we don't have all the ammunition. I don't care if we collect all of the trans identities in one roof, we still need our co-conspirators, because they're the ones with privilege. I'm preaching now. Come on. They're the ones with privilege. So when you come to my grave and you call me out, what you're doing is you're transferring that level of privilege you have, letting me know that I can have it as well. Not only that, you donated it with your breath. And then I turn around because of my trust and I say, well, we have no hope. We're lost. You know, nobody's going to listen to us. And then we get the confirmation from our co-conspirators, because remember, co-conspirator is in line, I think, also with the divine, okay, who can create things. And so who can speak things. When we speak things, that's a creation as well. And so for Ezekiel or the co-conspirator to say, don't worry about it. Now that you out, you're about to be placed in your own land, which means that you're not going to be on the front line. And now I'm going to usher and undergird you. That's what we need as a co-conspirators, not someone that's going to speak on our behalf, not someone that's going to tell us how it needs to be done, but someone that's going to affirm us, the one that's going to protect us, that one that's going to speak life when we are depressed, or when we feel that we no longer have the ammunition to even wake up, because every time we turn on the news, one of our brother, sister, siblings, and family member has just gotten murdered. when we only get 5 seconds on the news and we get misgendered, but somebody who can call that out and say, we need to correct this and we apologize. And you allow that apology to center our visibility. Those are co-conspirators. So when I look at Ezekiel, when I look at the valley of the dry bones, I always will say that for anyone that's listening, the bones are waiting on you. We as a trans community is waiting for you to partner with us. We have a blueprint. We were buried with it, but we've resurrected and we now have the power, and we need you on our side, not before us, but on our side. So when we go together, we have more power, and then we can see the change that we want to see in the world. And that means the change that I, as a trans woman of experience, want to see in the world, that you have adopted, and you're not forcing me based off the lenses you have. That's my thoughts on that.
You know, one of the great advantages of having a whole bunch of Black preachers is that you always get a word. one of the disadvantages is you run out of time before you run out of words. I'm wearing my Black Preachers Matter t-shirt today, so I was expecting you. I'm gonna stand up a little bit. There we go. Black. If I can get up.
I love it.
So thank you all. I think we have, I want to, Reverend Jean-Marie, do we have any questions?
We don't really have questions, but I do want to engage some of you all based on some of the comments you made. I want to start with Shania in terms of what it means to deconalize our theology. You went there, right? So part of, and I say this all the time, so my camera was off, but I was shaking my head like, my God, because I think particularly in the Black church, the ways in which we interpret the text, the analogies we use, right? And the ways we gender God, but also box God in, right? And so one of my favorite texts is Genesis, to be made in the image and likeness of God. But the reality is what we've done with God's image and through theology is we've made our image, right? The God. And so would you talk, and any one of you can do this, would you talk a little bit more about why, because, you know, I grew up in the church, I'm a church baby. My daddy taught me how to pray. My mama showed me God, is what I often say. I've always been a child of the church. And so most of my understanding of God comes from my rearing. But through my studies, through exposure of new information, through relationship, right, with communities that not often look like me, I've evolved. So a lot of the theology, a lot of the gospel truth that was given to me no longer can stand. And I think that is probably one of the biggest challenges in the church, is the lack of evolution, right? And so would you all talk a little bit more about why it is so important for us, those of us who's been in the church all of our lives, right? Why it's important for us to evolve.
So I too have been in the church my whole life, grew up Baptist. My mom and dad met at the church picnic. I've been at church cookout, because that's a word that I'm gonna talk about later. But and so I've been in church my whole life too. My dad was a deacon, mom was a deaconess, all the things, was running youth ministry, youth Bible study, blah, 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 my entire life. But what I've come to realize on this end of 41 is that just because it was taught in dogma does not make it truth. And there's a difference between authenticity and what you gave me that mirrors white supremacy.
That's right.
Because there's white supremacy built into our religion and our faith. I don't know if that's a revelation to anybody. That's right. But there's a lot of what we know to be westernized Christianity that's based on white supremacy culture. And another news flash, Black folks didn't meet Jesus in slavery. We didn't.
That's right.
We didn't meet Jesus in slavery. It wasn't, the first day of kindergarten and we introduced ourselves. We had an idea of what the divine was, who the divine was, and where the divine was in our lives way before those of us who ended up here in chattel slavery, although there were some of us who were here before chattel slavery, which is another issue we can talk about at another time. But anyway, and so I think that what has happened is we've allowed what the idea of whiteness and whiteness being perfectionism, and with whiteness being perfectionism, to become closer to that means to become closer to God. Because the idea, remember, the ideal of white supremacy culture is as a straight, heterosexual, cisgendered, white, Christian, upper middle class male. And so anywhere that you get from that, right, you're demified in any way. So therefore, that also creeps into our religion. And so the idea of perfectionism, the idea of being on top, the idea of heteronormative, the idea of trans as demified, the idea of all the things gave you brown, stick around, black, get back, all of that is white supremacy.
That's right. And
it shows up. And if we want to decolonize our minds, and we're really going to have authentic relationship with Christ, we've got to weed out the mess, the bull. I'm going to stop cussing because I know that y'all. But I'm the cussing preacher. But, we got to weed out the bullshit, because in the reality, authenticity of relationship with Christ requires us to move beyond what church teaches us into what Christ is really calling us into.
That's right.
And there's a difference between religion and relationship. And until we get to that core of what is really going on and faith, then we'll miss what God really has for us, especially in this time of social uprising. I believe God is speaking to the church right now.
That's right.
I believe we're in a season of God is saying, I'm tired of your buildings, and I'm tired of your formal coming together and all the things that is mentioned. I can't remember what prophet it was that talked about them, tired of your ceremonies and all these things. That God is calling us to someplace different. And in that authenticity is a decolonizing in our mind and a breaking down of the ways in which we have othered each other, and in effect to keep the gospel for ourselves and to keep Christ for ourselves.
That's right.
Because if we really listen to the gospel, it's whosoever.
That's right.
And if the whosoever ain't just those who show up at the bake sale and sit on your usher board, it's somebody that don't look like you, don't love like you, don't come from where you come from, don't walk like you, don't talk like you.
That's right.
And Christ has come for all of us.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Until we decolonize that, we lost.
That's right.
I want to add two disclaimers to the whole white and all those things. You should also be able-bodied, and you should also be lean. Because if you're too fat, you need to go too.
Right.
Because I want to talk, even when we talk about the current occupant of the White House and other people, we want to add fat as a pejorative, like there's only one body type. That is also a Eurocentric notion of what beauty looks like and what bodies should look like. So I'm going to add all that stuff in there.
Right.
As a fat, disabled, bald, old, black trans man, I'm all of that.
That's right.
And I am no less worthy, no less called, and no less powerful.
That's right. That's right.
And so I appreciate that.
Thank you for that. Eunice, I want to engage you a little because you really drew a great picture of everyday co-conspiratorship. Here's my challenge with allyship, white allyship. White allyship, there's a performance element to allyship, right? Mm-hmm. There's this idea of allyship looks for praise. They show up, right? Because what they're trying to do is really make a statement about themselves, not really a statement about justice. So they read all the good books, they got all the good language, and they can tell you how to do it, right? They call you up but when it's time to take risk, right? They on the phone. What you really did, and I was shaking my head, was really drew a great picture of what it means to be a co-conspirator when the cameras are off, when there is no rally, right? Like just every day. And I often say with co-conspirator, it's not a title, it's a lifestyle, right? It's not a title you're aspiring for, it's a lifestyle, willing to take a risk, right? Willing to live with discomfort, right? Mo, like you said, willing to jump in front, right? Because the possibility is if you jump in front of the bullet, they probably not going to shoot because you bear privilege as a co-conspirator, right? And so would you share a little bit more about the ways in which, and I appreciate, Lewis, the way you really helping me even expanding the conversation around able bodies, right? Because it's a privilege for me, I don't think about, because the world is created for me, right? And my able body in that way, right? So if you all would talk a little bit more about the everyday co-conspirator, and what it really means to take the risk for somebody else.
So for me, when I was in early transition, you know, I had this look that wasn't quite all together. You know, I was just getting facial hair, which I'm glad I finally got some more come in. I just, you know, I to myself, I looked not quite together, but I know I had to leave the house. I know I had to leave it. So there were a couple of times I would call someone to just come, just, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's important to just go with me to the supermarket. Because I know that when I have to walk around and I'm going slow because I'm trying to pick my stuff, you know, and I know I'm not being paranoid, that people are watching me and they're looking at me, you know, because I don't quite look male and I don't quite look female, but there's this hair that's spotty and all, you know, so I would just call, listen, I got to go to the supermarket, could you just come with me? And one of my friends that went with me, who is, I consider a co-conspirator, but some of them you got to watch too, would ask people, what are you looking at? Why are you staring? We just here trying to buy our food. We don't need you to do that. Just go about your business. A lot of our co-conspirators will need to do that. We'll need to speak up. We'll need to say something. And what it did for me was it made it easier for me the next day.
That's right.
To go out and be out in public. It made it easy because I felt like somebody lifted me up and gave me some strength that I didn't have in that moment. They literally, because I'm a Reiki master, they literally shared their energy with me and made it possible for me to go on the next day and not feel like I can't leave the house.
That's right.
It's those simple little things. It can be a phone call, but it's what you're saying in the phone call. What you're asking in the phone call. Listen, what do you need? Do you need me to come over? What is it that you need? Asking me what I need as opposed to telling me what I need because of something you read somewhere 100 years ago. Right. Asking me what I need in this moment, talking to me, uplifting me. Hey, and even giving me a Bible scripture or two that affirms and confirms who I am. Having those conversations. But the main thing is asking the question. What is it that you need from me?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the other piece about co-conspiratorship, and I'm going to come to you, Reverend Kamarian, the idea of living with discomfort. And I appreciate, I don't remember who mentioned this idea of rejecting this ideology around perfectionism, right? And so I'd like to talk a little bit more about discomfort and why it's important for us to be okay with living with discomfort and not, you know, so as a co-conspirator, I'm evolving, I'm learning, I make mistakes. And so for me, having a teachable spirit, right? And when I do make a mistake, being able to hear and receive so that I too learn and evolve, if that makes sense. And I think sometimes those who come and want to be allies, right? And they make a mistake or they do or say something and they get corrected. It's a discomfort that caused them to draw back, right? Co-conspirator says, I'm committed to this because I don't come for you for your approval. I come because I believe in justice. And so even when I make a mistake, I'm committed here because I believe in justice. Even when I ain't got it together, I am committed here because I believe in justice. So can we talk a little bit about that?
We could talk a little because you basically answered it. You did. And I think the wonderful thing is when I'm listening to Reverend Eunice as it relates to how he has defined allyship and co-conspirators and this discomfort. The easiest, and this is in my I statements, I have noticed that we have literally, not intentionally, probably as a trans community, as a trans movement, we have minimized accepting allies to the point where, and I want to say this very respectfully, I always honor my allies. I always honor those co-conspirators. I honor them. But I think that allies, they do too much. You know, they do too much. And respectfully, because they do too much, it becomes overwhelmed. And then I have to, or we have to, or those have to turn around and say, okay, thank you. We can take it from here now. Okay. And I'm going somewhere with this, so we can take it from here now. But a co-conspirator will be like, they will be cognizant. They will have that try the spirit by the spirit. They will be able to read the synergy or feel the synergy, read the room, and be able to know when to step back and not be offended. Okay. So, and this is not a direct, this is to promote allies to co-conspirators, okay, into our community. An ally is only going to do what they know. What they know. A co-conspirator is going to do what they know, but also go over and beyond, even if they don't know, if they feel that it's right. The easiest way I can say this, I think it was in James. I'm a preacher for real, y'all. In James, when James talks about faith without works is dead, I look at our allies as having the faith, and that is a wonderful thing to have faith. But genuine faith in a co-conspirator is going to have some work. It's going to have some fruit. It's going to have some bonding. It's going to have some power to justify where that faith came from and how it's being sustained. And so when I think about our allies, I think there's a stopping point, as you said earlier, where their chest is out, that I've done this good deed and I can check this off. But a co-conspirator is not looking for a reward. A co-conspirator is looking to make sure that they are positioned of power to I should say position of help, to give us the power, to make sure that the movement that we want, because we live this, we breathe this. And then there's a sense of, I'm doing this out of sympathy. I'm gonna let y'all figure out where that goes. Or I'm doing this out of pure empathy, which means that I'm not just showing up in sympathy because poor thing, you know, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Or I'm showing up as a co-conspirator saying, you know what, I have a relationship with you. I have a relationship with your community. And not only does this affect you, it affects me. Now, what we're going to do about it together. What do you need from me? Not telling you how to do it. What do you need from me? And so that's how I look at the two differences is that don't just stop at our faith. I think sometimes we use faith as a full excuse because we try to get credit for faith with our chest stuck out. But if you do the work, back to Bobby Jean, I think that's where the graduation of those that are allies coming our co-conspirators, where we're able to work together. Because believe it or not, when you become a co-conspirator in any setting and you partner with who you are supporting, when those outside looking in, we'll all look as one. Our power will be much stronger. There will be no distinction on who's who and who's what. All they will see is a massive power coming together. But in the allyship, you know the difference. And that's why we're not fully moving, because when there is no difference, you try to find the leader. I'm gonna stop.
I mean, whew. Mo, I want to come to you. There's a question from the audience that I want to direct to you, if that's okay, because you defined it. The question is, how do you personally push through your heavy dysphoric days?
Wow, that is certainly a big question. This morning, before this panel started, you asked me like how I was doing this morning. And I was like, oh, I just had an easy morning. And then when I was thinking back on it, I was like, you know what? This morning was challenging. I was really sitting with the names I wanted to uplift, or like the stories of trans people that have been killed, and that started my day like in this misalignment between like how I want the world to be and how it is inside of my soul. So what do I do on those days? I try to find grounding. I try to latch on to something that does feel like the world as it should be, but it's certainly challenging. It really helps to be in community with other people, to be in community with co-conspirators, to be in a relationship that feels very much co-created and collaborative. It helps to have like family members and other people who can just offer affirmation and kind words. I don't want people to take for granted how far that goes. Just the I see you, the nice haircut, the all the affirmations and the things that really do feel aligned and like someone can see me. That really matters. When we were talking earlier about being segmented or being asked to show up as separate parts of ourselves, people who can allow me to show up as all of my authentic self, and hold space for me in those ways, that like really helps. Now, what do I do for myself? A lot of self-care, a lot of self-love, a lot of self-affirmation. But it really is nice to see myself reflected back out in the world around me. That creates this euphoria and alignment of all of those things. And so, or all of those aspects of myself. So I guess that's how that's how I answer that question. It's some part my own internal work, and then some part seeing what I want in the world manifest around me via my external relationships and the communities and the spaces I engage in.
I want to invite others who would like to answer that. Yeah, Eunice.
So for me, you know, I draw from what it's like to be Black in this society and walk out of a front door. I draw from that. It's like, okay, so today I'm Black. I gotta walk out, and I don't know how this is gonna all turn out. Back in the day, way back in the day, I was an opera singer, and I used to find myself in rooms and in places where I would be the only Black person there, and I would know it before I even got there, right? Because I'm an opera singer. And usually that's the way that goes. So I would prepare myself mentally before I got there. There's a whole Zen moment that you have to, I didn't know it was Zen then, but it's a whole Zen moment that you have to go through in order to deal with people in that grouping. So now as a trans man, as a Black trans man, I use those same Zen moments and carry it over. You have to get yourself centered. Fortunately for me, though, that at this age, I have learned some other techniques that I can use to help me go along. I am a Reiki master. Prayer is definitely very important, but it's the sharing from other people that also help me to make it through on a day-to-day basis. Absolutely on a day-to-day basis. I think of Lewis. I'm like, okay, how would Lewis work on this? Or I'll draw energy from Lewis, or I'll draw energy from Carmarion. I'll hear her voice. Well, you know, and I'll hear something like, well, you know, you just got to get out there now. You know, Jesus is with you, and I'm like, okay, Jesus is with me. You know, and I've even begun now to hear Renee, because you know the voice. I draw on all those voices that help me to keep moving on a day-to-day basis, because I want to live. I want to live, and I want to have a life. So I have to draw from wherever I can get it, And that's just for me. I know others, they do other things. I've had the surgeries to help me kind of get myself together so that I feel comfortable with me, but also that I'm presenting myself in the way that I need in order to survive in the world, period. And that's what has to happen. That's how I roll.
Can I just say one thing, piggyback, something Eunice said, I'm feeding from you, brother. I'm feeding from you today. It's important for me to share that it's important if you can, and if you can't, reach out to us. But having a support network is very powerful. And I need to say that because, we're small but wide. And I think that when we share our experiences and when we are able to bond, we learn from each other. And so I want to be able to offer that, even if people want to reach out to me on Facebook, it is important to have that social network. Louis and I can tell you, when we first transitioned many years ago, probably when Jesus was a little boy, we didn't have that social network. Almost lost our mind because we didn't have a checks and balance per se. We only had what we saw from the discrimination on outside looking in. And so I want to extend that to our audience, to our listeners, that having a social network, an honest, true social network, is very vital and it is important. And I think anyone on this panel will look forward to partnering with you if you need that circle of friendship.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So I look at the time and we end this session and we close from this place. I'd like to invite all of you to offer closing words as we end this session. And I'm going to start with you, Renee, if you would offer. Yeah, I'm going to start with you. You're on top of my screen. Would you offer us closing remarks? These last 2 weeks has been amazing. And, as we leave this place, how do you offer closing remarks to us that are viewing, who are aspiring to be co-conspirators, those who are viewing who are part of the trans community, who might be feeling alone, and this particular panel has given them hope these last 2 weeks, right? So what are your closing remarks for our audience? Beginning with you, Renee.
I was thinking about the Asada chant. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. I find that kind of poetic. The fact that we need to lift up and protect and love on each other. I feel like love is a religion, and love is a language that we need to dove over into more often. I was just telling my sister a few days ago that as a child, I feel like I never heard "I love you" enough, and I had a family member tell me they love me. They didn't tell me they loved me till I was in my 30s. And it's less important when you hear it older, but as a person that hears it younger, it affirms you and it gives you the strength to go out and face the world whichever way it is. So I'm just gonna say, love on trans people, and don't make a fetish out of us or a token out of us, but love us.
Thank you, Renee Taylor. I can't say thank you enough for being here, for being you, for the words of wisdom and the way you show up in the world and how you are consistently pursuing a world for justice for all. God bless you. Thank you. And we're so excited to have you. Reverend Shania Leonard, if you would offer closing remarks as we leave this place.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful 2 weeks. It's been great. 3 of the panelists I already knew, but it's good to meet the other 2 and good to be reconnected with the other 3. Also, I think that we would all be remiss if we did not lift up the name of Marsha P. Johnson in this circle. And we can't talk about trans experience in this country and not talk about Marsha, who is the mother of the gay rights movement, who fought for gay folks before transgender was even a title that you could, or a label or a category or anything that you could give anyone, and who lost her life in this work because of bigotry and transphobia and hatred that it still exists in this country. And so we say her name as we lift up the names of others who have gone on before us, because she's our ancestor and she paved the way for us to even have this type of conversation right now, along with Sylvia Rivera and others. And then I would also say that I would encourage others to really, really think about what is really your religion and your faith, and how has white supremacy played a role in that? And what is reality and what is dogma? And what is Christ calling you to in this season? Because there's an uprising going on and the Spirit is at work. And what is God calling? And are you listening? And shout out to the best city ever, Philadelphia. I always got to say that.
Reverend Shania Leonard, we are grateful for you. Thank you so much for who you are and how you show up in the world, committed to the work of justice. God bless you. Mo Brown.
Yeah, I would like, I guess in closing, I really would like people to explore their definitions of justice and how it looks juxtaposed against like their behavior, how they show up in the world. I would want their theology to match their practice or their theory to match their practice. And so I guess I offer this. To me, equality is everyone is invited to the table. Equity is everyone is invited to the table and has a seat. Justice for me is everyone is invited to the table, has a seat, enough on their plate to eat, silverware, all of the things, right? And if God is a just God, then they're certainly interested in justice. And so this for me is the model where everyone is welcome in this work. So I want other people to explore their understanding of justice. We've offered some really great understandings of justice and healing here. And I want people to take away for them to like really go and look in their lives, search themselves over, search their hearts and see if it really aligns with like how they're living their lives. And if not, go ahead and do that work and align your life and your light to justice.
Mo Brown, thank you so much for saying yes to this conversation and for saying yes to who you are and how you show up in the world. We're so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for you. God bless you. Reverend Carmarion Anderson, will you offer your closing remarks?
Absolutely. And thank you again. And I give the same sentiment. It's been a great 2 weeks to come together with family and to share our narratives and our voices. And again, from our own I statements, I believe that gives us power. A couple of things that I will say is one is even in the current climate that we're living in, from an upcoming presidential election to all the way from still understanding the BLM movement, even to trans visibility. I often think of Lady Justice, and I often think, are we duplicating, covering up our eyes so we will not see? And perhaps if her eyes was open, she will see what they did then and what they're doing now. She's gotten complacent. And decisions are being made because of the commonality of what we feel the outcome is going to be, because we continue to relive it. And so I want to just say to us and our audience that our eyes must be open. And when our eyes do become open, we will realize that we as a trans community, our co-conspirators, even our allies and our mama and them, our daddy and them, all of them, we are one. you know, and I use this from a scripture that says that neither of us are Jews or Greek. And there is no bond or free, and there is neither male or female, for we are all one in Christ Jesus. And I do feel that when we have our eyes open and we realize that when you see me, you see yourself, because we are one in Christ Jesus, that is when how we will define this movement, as I am calling, we're in an awakening season. So as Renee said earlier, you know, stay woke, don't go to sleep, because I believe we're going to miss the manifestation of what I believe Christ is showing us in this season. And it first is going to start with partnering with those that have been marginalized, which is us as the trans-identified community. And we need more co-conspirators, and we need them to speak life into us. We need them to affirm us, and we need them to see us and remember that we're all one.
Reverend Kamarion Anderson, Harvey, thank you so much for your presence these last 2 weeks, for the gift of your words and wisdom, the ways you come and preach the gospel to us, for those of us who went to Bedside Baptist this morning. Thank you for this opportunity to engage you. Reverend Eunice Coleman, will you offer your closing remarks?
Certainly. First of all, thank you so much. As everyone has said, the last couple of weeks have been just extraordinary. I have actually learned a lot myself, which is awesome, which should always happen in settings like this. I want to say that the awakening that is happening, that the staying woke that is happening is, please understand that it is not just Christians who are having this awakening moment. We are all having it. Everybody, every spiritual walk and every spiritual path is having the same awakening, but we must continue to stay awake. What I would ask for those who have been listening these last couple of weeks, pray for us. Pray for us, because the truth of the matter is this work that we do, for lack of a better term, it is a target on our backs. But we accept fully that target. We accept it, but we need your prayers, because the work needs to continue. We need to keep going. And the prayer is not just for our safety, it's for our health, our mental health, our minds, body, and spirit. Keep us in your prayers. Think about us every now and then, because even the thought itself is a prayer in and of itself. And I look forward to seeing everybody again on the next thing that we got to get done. Amen.
Thank you so much for your words, your presence, your yes to this conversation. And we're grateful that, as you said, you've learned so much. We too have learned and shifted. And so thank you for your presence this afternoon. And last but certainly not least, the Reverend Lewis Mitchell. Will you share your closing remarks as we leave this place, Lewis?
First and foremost, I am so deeply grateful, not only for the opportunities to have these conversations, but for these brilliant, amazing conversation partners. I am awed by the life of good fortune that I have to be surrounded with such amazing people. I want to offer an analogy, because I am the master of bad analogies. That is one of my callings. But as we leave this place, you know, we all have the opportunity to do something. Find your something, whether it's upsetting the earth to prepare it for seed, planting good seeds, wandering the perimeter to keep the predators away. If you're pouring water, if you're spreading manure, whatever your thing is, do that thing. I think those of us that have been well seasoned in this and other movements know that whatever seeds we plant, we may not ever be able to see grow to blossom, but we keep planting anyway. And we need you to keep the predators away. We need you to keep turning the earth over. We need you to keep pouring some water. We need you to keep being some sunshine, being some manure, whatever your thing is, because they all they all will raise the plant. And that's what we want. We want good plant. And each of us is planted in this thing. As much as you can, move away from the optics. Move away from the optics of Christ following to deep Christianity, which means deep love, deep self-interrogation, and it means extending yourself beyond your own self-interest. If we cannot do that, then we are not doing the work of Christ. We are doing the work of a whole lot of theologians and politicians that put together this thing we call the Bible and have tried to guide us down all these paths. And I want to say to you, white Jesus is a gateway drug. That's all.
What you cannot do is drop the mic like that. Reverend Lewis Mitchell, thank you so much. Thank you for your yes to this work and for, again, coordinating this great panel and moderating, and your commitment to justice, the ways in which you show up in the world. We are grateful. I am grateful. Thank you all to our viewers who are watching. We're grateful that you come every week to engage us as we all learn and evolve and try to be what it means, or try to answer what it means to be my neighbor, what it means to love my neighbor through co-conspiratorship. Join us again next week. And as always, God bless you. Goodbye. Bye-bye.